Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode from the RPA Vanguard channel. My name is Andy Menon. In this video, we are going to resume our discussion on the Excel template data extractor solution accelerator by understanding the data service elements. Let's get started. So if you have watched the first part of this video series, you already are familiar with this PDF. And this is the PDF that I started with when I downloaded and unpacked the Solution Accelerator template, set of files. And I went through this document and made many number of comments and highlights that would help me find my way around this template if I wanted to. Right. So the first thing that I understood by poking around and reading this template is that understanding the data service elements is key to understanding what this entire solution accelerator template does, right? And therefore, in this video, we are going to understand or look at those data service elements. And then in the later part of this discussion, I'm going to kind of show you how I took what I learned from this solution accelerator template and the data service documentation in this PDF, and then applied it to my own data set. So with that, I'm just going to look into my comments in this PDF, and I'm going to look for data diagram. And I'm going to quickly navigate down there. So here, if you look at this, there is a link to sustainability data diagram, which is probably the first thing that you must look at, because the companion documentation of that sustainability diagram is here, right? It follows this link and it runs several pages, right? So it's important to look at the sustainability data diagram. I'm going to go into the download of the solution accelerator template and show you where it is at. So if you go into the downloaded folder, which is the _dev or -dev, there is a documentation, and then there is a related documentation. And then if you go in here, you have the sustainability data diagram. So you click on this, and it's going to open up in Adobe or your browser, right? But other than that, I also wanted to show you something else. There is this file that I briefly mentioned in the first part of this video series, is the template for sustainability data file, right? This is a very interesting document. And if you open it, you will find this, you should expect this in your in your Excel. And one of the good things about this document is that it comes with full description of what this data is, right? What is the data gathered, and what are the descriptions of several of these, the attributes of data. And therefore, if you go into the README, there is a lot of good documentation on what this is, and you can find some of it also in the PDF. And then if you navigate the tabs here, you will find the core entities, right? I call them the core entities because they're at the center of the whole data service entity universe, meaning this is where the meaningful data is. And there are three different tabs. One is for energy data, one is for emissions data, and then the other is for waste. And because this data has been gathered based on a certain standard, and you can read about it in the documentation, it's here in the intro, the data structure is identical, right? And if you go back into the README, it shows you, if I magnify this a little bit, and if I bring this up, it shows you what are the standards based on which this data was gathered, right? And therefore, the data is pretty organized and pretty identical across the tabs. Now, one of the things that is missing from here, right, is the data itself, right? You just have the data structure, but there's no data, the physical data itself. So it's very difficult to understand how the data looks and get a visual on this data. But that said, there is also an instruction here that tells you that there are some pick lists that you can unhide from in this spreadsheet, right? So if I go into, and if I say unhide sheets, it will show you different pick lists that are actually hidden, probably to avoid the distraction. And if you select all of those and click on OK, you will see several of these data elements that have been kind of selected as pick lists, which means that in your data service, and they are stored as choice sets, right? So you can go through each of these pick lists and then relate them back to the data, right? Now, the only thing that's now missing here is actually the core data, right? Samples of the core data. So where do we get this, right? How do we understand? If we don't look at the data, even if we read the documentation, if we don't look at the data, then there is some kind of something missing, right? So this is where you should kind of get away from the documentation and start poking around into the download itself, right? So you go into the template folder and then go into processes, and you see there is a performer template and then there's a dispatcher template, and then go into dispatcher, and if you go into this folder here, there is another subfolder called dummy sustainability data file source. So if I click on it and go into input, you see it's quite deep. But then I think there's a reason why UiPath has packaged it that way. I think it's just a matter of convenience because that file is part of a dispatcher process. But if you open this file, right, this is what you can expect. It's almost identical to the other document that you saw, but the difference here is you will see some sample data for energy, emissions, and waste, right? Now, this is a good thing because having eyes on the data and then going back into the documentation and reading about it makes more sense, right? And now, why is that important? It's important because you will see some of these data points that are empty. If you look at this part of the data, right, you can see that if you don't look through the documentation, it gives an impression that value chain category is mandatory, whereas value chain subcategory or the entity name or the activity category are optional, right? But that's not always true, right? This is what, when you look at the data, it might not always be true. So if you go back into the documentation and then look at value chain category, for example, if I go in here, the value chain category is a relationship, right, that comes from the value chain category. Most likely this is a pick list. And if you look at it, if you see the three rows, value chain category name, subcategory, entity name, they are all not mandatory, right? But if you look into the data, it makes it look like it is mandatory in one place and optional in the other, but that's not always true. So yeah, you see a lot of information is divided between the data sample, the documentation in the Excel here, and also the core documentation in the PDF, right? But this is the best source of reference. So if you can go through this and then understand the data, that's great. So which brings us to the sustainability data diagram, right? And if you look at the sustainability data diagram, it has three core entities in the middle. And if I scroll through this, you have data emissions, data waste. And then if I scroll to the left, there is energy. So these are core entities, right? This is where all the actual usable data is stored. And then each of these has attributes, right? And those are all bolded in here. And each of those attributes come from satellite entities, right? Those are strong entities and they must exist before before the core entities are loaded, right? And then if we go up, there is this system of records, which is the data information, right? And this data information records everything that has got to do with the enterprise that actually, that has got to do something with this data, right? So if you look at this, it's got the enterprise name, the code, its entire location, the site, and then it has got various categories that are now linked from satellite entities into this system of records. So you got data information entity, you got the core entity energy, the core entity emissions, and the core entity waste. And all of these have got satellite entities that are either, right, that are not either, that are basically existing and can exist independently and have to exist before these entities are loaded. And you can see the lines drawn from each of these satellite entities into these core entities show the relationships between these entities, right? And if you look through these, one by one, piece by piece, it will make a lot of sense, right? And then you can make your way through understanding how this data is stored in data service, right? So that is what I got from this. And then I remember seeing something like this in the past, and that kind of rang a bell. And when I looked at this data information here, looking at the country, the location, the site name, and code, it jogged my memory. And I thought that, why can't I take that data set and try to implement something along the same lines, right? So we'll take a look at that next. Right. So I was talking to you about something jogging my memory, and this is the website that I remember seeing this data sometime in the past. And this is the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and it has several files, data files that are accessible to the public that have to do with the data related to the environment, right? And so if you go down to this, scroll down this page here, there is this summarized data, right? And this was of interest to me, right? If you look at this year 2023, and this is something that I saw in the past, you see this is a huge data set, almost 51,300 records. And what this data contains is the concentration of several elements in the environment by monitor. They call it annual concentration by monitor, right? And if we download this data and then unzip it and open it in Excel, you see it's a massive file, has got many number of attributes, and it has got about 50,000 rows and 51,000 rows. And you can see it has got several attributes that are related to the data that it captures. And one of the similarities I saw with the data service diagram in the Solution Accelerator template and this data is that it also captures data by site, right? So if you start from the left and if you look at it, it's got state code, county code, site number, and then it has got all the data points and data attributes that are related to the data. And these are actually measurements. These are readings and that are recorded at a particular site. And if we scroll over to the right, there is more information on the site itself. So what's of interest is this local site name, right? So the Environmental Protection Agency is the enterprise, and there are several sites, unique sites in a county and a state. And each of those sites record a certain number of readings, right? And so I found this to be kind of similar, and I thought, can I make this data can I implement the Solutions Accelerator using this data, right? Can I create a data service entity schema and then load this data? What I did is, having learned from the sustainability diagram, right? I go back into the sustainability diagram and I saw that, based on the documentation I read and based on what I learned, when I looked at this, okay, the data is named with a certain label, right? For example, here you see everything is named with the prefix ESG, right? And so what I did is I labeled my data similarly, and my entities similarly, and I gave them a prefix ACM. ACM means annual concentration data by monitor, right? So if you look at the rough work of all these tabs here, I've given them the prefix ACM, right? And then for some of the choice sets, I gave them the prefix CS. CS underscore means choice set, right? So I divided the data into the core data, which is the measurements data, and then the attributes, right? Which are something like ACM state, ACM county, ACM site, etc. And then I divided them, and I also divided them out to be choice sets, right? I had to kind of understand what attributes of data that I can take and nominate as choice sets, right? So now that you have looked at this this huge blob of data, scrolling through this is pretty heavy. So what I've done is I've created a more manageable document, and we will go through that document and understand how the data service entities have been laid out. All right, so I'm back. This time I have opened an Excel document that's a bit more lightweight and a bit more manageable. And what you're looking at is an extract, a subset, a small subset of the larger data set that you saw that I put in here as sample, right? This is the sample data, just like how UiPath has included sample data in the Solutions Accelerator, right? This is my version of it. So this is the sample data, and there are some color codes. Some of these color codes, like if you look at the blue ones, they are really strong entities, right? These are really strong entities, and they have to exist before the core data is loaded, right? So if you look at state, state is the top level entity. It has to exist because you need to know the geographic information. So state is an independent entity, followed by county, right? County is the next, and then each county has got one or more sites. So the site is the next. So that is the color coding. And if you look at these ones, I don't know whether it's purple or violet, but if you look at the dark colored columns here, these are satellite entities. These are attributes of those measurements, right? So if you have measurements on the right, if you look at it, these are all these numeric values, these decimal values, etc. They're all they're all actual data measurements, and then those data measurements have got certain attributes, right? For example, it has got parameter code, it has got parameter name, sample duration, pollutant standard, metrics, etc., etc. These are the satellite entities, right? So these satellite entities must exist before the core data has been loaded, right? And the third, item or element of this data are the choice sets. So if you look at this, earthy brown color, they're all choice sets. So I have very few choice sets here, and I had to actually, decide which one to store as a choice set and which one to not. And what I did was I came up with a rule of thumb. And when I looked at the distinct values, for example, if I apply a filter on the larger data set and then look at the values here, if the number of values are 10 or less, if the distinct values are 10 or less, that becomes a choice set, right? Because, values, some of these values can be easily enumerated. So they will be, set as choice sets, right? So datum has 2 unique values, and then there is event type. There are maybe 4 or 5 event types. Completeness indicator, there are a couple of them. And certification indicator, again, there are a couple of values. So these can be easily enumerated, and these can be stored easily by creating them just once, right? And so once I got all that in place, I came up with this entity diagram. I did not create this in any kind of entity modeling tool or something, but I put it here because as I was creating these, I was documenting these. And if you look at, let's go to the center here, and let's look at the core entities, right? This is the core here, right, in the center. We have the system of record, the data information, and you can see this is pretty similar to what we saw in the sustainability data diagram, right? If you look at the data information, it's got the enterprise, it's got the location and the site name and the site code, etc., right? So here, if you look at the ACM data information entity, the entry point entity, it has got almost the same kind of information, right? So every system of record is associated with that enterprise. And in this case, the enterprise is Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. But then every record is unique because the combination of county, the site, and the state makes it unique, right? So there's an EPA site in Alabama, there's an EPA site in, say, in Massachusetts, etc. So there are EPA sites throughout the 50 states, right, in the US. And therefore, the ACM data information makes that system of record unique for that site in that county, in that state. And then you can see the relationships, and it shows from which other satellite entity that relationship is coming, right? Now, this ACM data information is the first core entity, and it has got this unique ID. Once you create it, it has a unique ID. And then that unique ID gets associated with the concentration data entity. This is where most of the actual measurements, the scientific measurements, are stored, right? And if you look at this, you will see anything that is not formatted is actually that scientific measurement, right? If you look at all of this, and there are many number of them, several, and you can see that all of this is uniquely associated with the data information ID. And that data information ID comes from ACM data information, right? Therefore, every record in this table is associated with a unique enterprise site identifier, right? So that is the first relationship. The next relationships would be the attributes of the data, right? Again, you can see the dark colors, the color code being followed. And there are about 9 or 10 of them, and each of them come from their respective entities, right? For example, parameter name comes from ACM parameter. Sample duration comes from ACM duration, so on and so forth, right? And then there are those that have choice sets, right? And again, these are in that earthy brown color. There are maybe 3 or 4 of them. And if you look at it, it says it comes from CS datum. Event type comes from CS event type, completeness, so on and so forth, right? So these are the 2 core entities, right? This is where our actual data is going to rest. Now, if we swing over to the left of the core entities, you have these very strong entities, right? You have the ACM state. It's a unique state record for every state in the United States. Then you've got the county, which is dependent on the state, right? So the county has got state information. Then comes the site. The site has got the local site name, but that site name is associated with county and state. And so the information is inherited or linked from the entities to the left of it, right? And then if you go over to the right of these entities, of these core entities, you will find all the attribute entities, right? The parameter, POC, datum, etc. All those that we saw here in the color code. And then in the end, there would be the choice sets, right? And here you can see that the choice sets are very few in number, and therefore I decided to put them as choice sets, right? Datum has 2, certification indicator has 2, so on and so forth. So this is how, this is where I ended up after going through the entire documentation of the data service elements of the solutions accelerator. So if you look at this Excel, and then if you just compare that with this sustainability data diagram, you can see that it's laid out just like it's laid out here. So I exit the comment section, and if you go out here and look at it once again, you will see that there is a data information system of records entity, and then there is that entity links to the core entities, right? In my case, there's only one core entity, which is concentration data. And then there are several entities to the left and the right that are satellite entities that have attributes of the data being captured, and they are all linked in some shape or form to the core entities and also the system of records. So as the last step, I'm just going to show you the entities in the UiPath automation cloud. And I'm also going to talk to you about a couple of concerns that you have to be careful about when you are creating these entities. And having that thought in mind, even before you start building out your entities, would be very helpful. So let's take a look at that next. All right, then we are in the instance of my automation cloud, and I'm in the in the data service. And if you look at this, all the entities that are listed in this Excel have been created, and you can see that they have been named in a specific way, and they all indicate that they have to do with annual concentration by monitor prefix. That means they are all linked to a specific data set. The other thing that I wanted to talk about are a couple of things that you must keep in mind when you create these these data service entities, and also the choice sets. The first thing is, let's look at the choice set, right? So if I go to let us say manage choice sets, and if I say add a choice set, so here you can see that all the choice sets have been created. But I don't think there's much to look at here. You can look at the documentation and it's all going to match. But what I wanted to discuss was some of the concerns. So when you go to choice sets and you add a choice set, let's say my choice set, and let us say that your choice set has got 2 values, yes and no, right? Just a binary choice. And I'm going to say show name. Obviously, the show name is the cosmetic name or the user-friendly name of that choice set item, right? So yes is my choice set item. And then there is this name which is underneath, right? That is actually the choice in your enumeration, right? When you access this in the data service entity, or when you access this in Studio, you will see how that looks like in a later video. But there are some restrictions on how you name them. For example, I can't do something like this. If I say Y, right, I immediately have an error. That's because the guidelines for naming variables is they must be of, one of the guidelines is they must have some minimum length, right? So if I name it as yes, that's good, right? Now, this is cool because the minimum length that's required for the word yes is 3. That's great. I'm going to add another choice. This time it's no. And you see, I have an error almost immediately, right? So you have to think about this, because just because you see a specific value in your data set and you want to convert that into a choice set, you have to have this known. If you know this well in advance, that might help. So what I did was I named it as no, right? Or you might want to do something else. You might want to say not yes, right? And then I'm going to show you how my certification indicator, for example, ended up. So if I go in here and, sorry, not certification indicator, my bad. I think it's CS datum or CS completeness indicator. Yeah, it's completeness indicator. And you can see that how the names have been mapped, right? The internal variable names. N is, funky, right? And Y is normal, right? The internal variable is S and no. So when you use this choice set as an enumerable in your studio, you will see NOO, not NO, right? So that's something that you have to keep in mind. Now comes the second constraint, right? If I go back to entities, and if I bring up this entity called ACM data information, sorry, I'm wrong, going all over the place. So if I go to ACM concentration data, and if you go into some of these names and look at them carefully, they start with numbers, right? So if you look at the, go back to the core entity definition here and look at some of them, they start with numbers, right? Now let me try to create a field with a which is identical to what's in here, right? So let me start with fourth max value, for example. And I'll create a new field. Of course, I'm not going to save it, but now you see, as soon as you add it, you have an error. The problem is, in addition to the length, it has, between 3 and 30 characters, it has to fit the variable naming conventions of C# or VB, right? Which is the underlying language, right? And you can't do this either, right? So the display name can be anything, right? As usual, because that's the cosmetic name that is visible, but the variable is still a problem, right? So one of the conventions that I used was I took this prefix and then I put it behind the main, alphanumeric part of the data point. So here it's max value fourth, right? And so keep this in mind, because when you see these kind of data attributes, the translation is not straight because the internal variable has to be named a certain way. So if you do that work up front, it will be that much easier for you to create your entities, right? So I'm going to cancel this out, and then I'm going to show you, how this thing looks. For example, if I edit this, one specific, if I say edit, and if I look at this, you can see how this looks. The display name looks very close to the actual name of the data point, but then I've taken the numeric part and shoved it to the end. And then when you are actually loading the entity from Studio, or from Studio, you'll have to look for max date time second, not the second max date time, right? Remember that. So don't get lost. Have this knowledge beforehand before you create the data service entities, and that's going to make it that much easier for you to give instructions to your development team on how to use or how to interact with these data service entities when they finally start coding the libraries to load the data into the data service entity, right? So that is all for this video. and I hope you have learned something new. In the next video, we'll be looking at some of the reusables of the Solution Accelerator template, and then we'll also take a look at the libraries that have been built in order to load data into this entity that we discussed in this session. So if you like the content of this video, please do like and subscribe to my channel. I'll truly appreciate it. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.